You are looking at a quarter acre of dirt that saved a family over $6,000 on groceries in a single year. Not a farm, not a homestead, just the backyard behind their house. They grew tomatoes, garlic, and greens using methods that cost less than one grocery run. When you see the receipts side by side, you will understand exactly why the food industry never wants you to see what a quarter acre can actually yield. This is the Coleman family. 2 incomes, 3 kids, a mortgage in suburban Ohio. Their grocery bill hit $900 a month. They'd never planted a vegetable. Then they dug up a quarter acre and followed a system designed for people who have no time and no experience. The numbers I'm about to show you from their actual receipts made me stop and recalculate my own grocery budget. And the one crop that outperformed everything else is something you probably already eat. Sarah Coleman still remembers the exact grocery receipt that broke her. It was January of last year. The total came to $943.16 for 2 weeks. 3 kids, 2 adults. Nothing organic, nothing fancy, just chicken thighs and cereal, and carrots and milk. She told her husband Ryan that night, "We cannot afford to eat like this anymore." But they also couldn't afford to move, couldn't afford to quit their jobs, and definitely couldn't afford to buy a real farm. So Ryan started searching for something else. Late at night, in a disappearing forum buried on page 6 of Google, he found a post from a retired agriculture professor in Indiana. The professor had spent 40 years studying exactly how much food a family could grow on a quarter acre, with 0 hired labor, using methods that didn't require a rototiller or a greenhouse or a single expensive gadget. He had receipts, spreadsheets, planting calendars. He called it the minimum input maximum yield table garden, and he'd been ignored by an entire generation that forgot how to grow anything. Ryan read every post. He printed the planting charts. In March, the Colemans borrowed a shovel from a neighbor and measured out exactly a quarter acre, 11,000 square feet. They marked beds with string and stakes, exactly 4 feet wide, so nobody would step on the soil. They planted garlic first, hundreds of cloves in the cold ground while there was still frost. They put in tomatoes, 18 varieties, not because they needed 18, but because the professor insisted diversity paid the hidden bills. They tucked basil between the tomatoes, parsley along the edges, lettuce in the shade of the garage wall. His chart called those gap plants, the spaces between the obvious crops that most beginners ignore. They made $300 in mistakes the first month. Too much water, then not enough. A groundhog that chewed through 6 pepper plants. But they kept going because the professor had written one line that made them furious. He said, "The grocery industry makes $4 trillion a year worldwide, and it depends on one belief, that you are incapable of feeding yourself." Sarah hung that line on the fridge. By July, the garden had exploded. They were hauling baskets of tomatoes into the kitchen every morning. They learned to blanch and freeze. They learned that garlic scapes are food, not waste. They gave away zucchini to the entire block. And then, on the last day of September, they sat at the dining table with a pile of grocery receipts from the past 12 months and a yellow legal pad. Ryan punched numbers into a calculator for 20 minutes. When he looked up, Sarah thought he had made a mistake. The number he showed her wasn't possible, and it was only half the story, because the real discovery wasn't how much money they saved. It was what the professor had hidden at the bottom of his spreadsheet. A single crop that cost nothing to grow gave them more food per square foot than anything else they planted, and now saves them $100 a month on one ingredient they use to buy twice a week. But before I tell you what it is, you need to see exactly how the numbers broke down. The number Ryan showed Sarah that night at the dining table was $6,248. That was their reduction in grocery spending over the previous 12 months, compared to the year before they planted a single seed. Sarah asked him to run the numbers again. He ran them 3 times. The total added up every time. $6,248 on a quarter acre, working weekends, using tools they already owned. And that number came from only 4 crops stacked in sequence. The rest of the harvest, the peppers and zucchini and beans and herbs, were all bonus. Free food they didn't even budget for. The professor's spreadsheet was not a theory, it was a receipt. But the breakdown matters more than the total, because it reveals exactly where the grocery industry makes its margin off families who don't know how cheap food really costs to produce. Let me show you. Garlic. The Colemans planted 240 cloves in October, mulched with straw, and walked away. 8 months later, they pulled 240 heads, cured them in the garage, and stopped buying garlic for the entire year at $1 per head store price. That was $240 they kept. Input cost, $30 for the seed stock. Return, 8 to 1. And the garlic took up 60 square feet. That's the size of a parking space. Tomatoes. 18 varieties, 72 plants trained up string trellises. From late July through the first frost in October, those plants threw 320 pounds of fruit. They ate tomatoes fresh, canned 80 jars of sauce, and still gave bags away. At $3 a pound average, that's $960. Seed and string cost them $42. Return, 23 to 1. And the quarter acre still had 9,000 square feet left over. But those are the headline crops. The number that stunned Sarah was not the garlic or the tomatoes. It came from something the professor called the perpetual harvest gap strategy. Most gardeners plant a row of lettuce, harvest it once, then stare at bare soil. The professor taught the Colemans to fill every gap between larger plants with fast, cut-and-come-again greens. Lettuce, spinach, arugula, mizuna, mustard. Crops that go from seed to salad in 21 days and regrow after cutting. He told them to plant 6 feet of greens every single week from March through October, tucked along the edges of beds, beneath the tomato canopy, in the narrow strip between the fence and the compost pile. Ryan followed the schedule. Every Saturday he poked seeds into any square inch of soil he could find. By May, they were eating salad twice a day because it was free. By June, they stopped buying greens entirely. No more $5 boxes of spring mix. No more $3 heads of romaine that turned brown in the crisper drawer. Sarah calculated just the greens savings. They had been spending about $95 a month on lettuce, kale, spinach, and herbs, mostly on bagged salad they bought on the way home from work twice a week. The garden eliminated that line item completely. That alone was $1,140 across the year, not from a harvest they weeded and worried over, from seeds they scattered in the cracks of the garden and forgot. And here is the pivot the professor hid in plain sight. The 4 crops that generated all those savings, garlic, tomatoes, basil, and salad greens, together occupied less than 1,000 square feet, 1/10 of the quarter acre. The other 10,000 square feet the Colemans were still learning to use. That means their $6,248 year was not a ceiling. It was a floor. The math suggested a full quarter acre, optimized, could erase a grocery bill entirely. But the professor did not give them that math directly. He buried it inside a spreadsheet labeled Appendix C that nobody downloaded. And when Ryan finally opened the file, the single number at the bottom of the page made him realize the Colemans had only scratched the surface. The number was not about savings. It was about replacement, and it threatened the entire business model of the supermarket. The number Ryan found at the bottom of Appendix C was 18,000. That was the dollar figure the professor calculated a family of 5 could erase from their annual grocery bill using a fully optimized quarter acre. Not savings. Replacement. The entire produce line item gone, plus enough surplus to trade with neighbors for eggs and honey and meat. The professor had not just built a garden plan, he had built a financial escape hatch. And he had buried it because he knew what happened the last time Americans figured this out. In 1944, 20 million American households grew victory gardens. That's 3 out of every 5 families. Those gardens produced 40% of all fresh vegetables consumed in the United States that year. Let that land. 40% of the national vegetable supply came from backyards and vacant lots. Not from farms, not from grocery chains. The government printed pamphlets showing exactly how to do it. Seed companies ran ads in every newspaper. Schools taught children to grow carrots and beans as a patriotic duty. The knowledge was everywhere, and it worked. Americans fed themselves. Then the war ended, and within 5 years, the entire infrastructure that taught a nation to grow food was erased. The USDA stopped funding gardening education. The pamphlets disappeared. Food corporations ran a coordinated campaign urging women to trade their garden hose for frozen dinner rolls and boxed cake mix. Advertisements called home canning old-fashioned and messy. Convenience became the new patriotism. By 1955, the number of home gardens had collapsed. The knowledge our grandparents held disintegrated in a single generation. This was not an accident. A supermarket chain makes its highest margin on fresh produce. The numbers are brutal once you see them. A single tomato plant costs you $3 in seed, water, and a pinch of fertilizer, and it produces 20 pounds of fruit across a season. In the store, those 20 pounds would cost you $60, and they would have been picked green, gassed with ethylene, and shipped 1,500 miles from a field in Mexico. The markup is not 50%. It's not 100%. It's 2,000%. The grocery industry depends entirely on you never doing this math. The Colemans did the math, and what they realized next changed what they put in their mouths every single day. A tomato that ripens on the vine absorbs nutrients and flavor compounds that a truck-ripened tomato never will. Homegrown produce is not just cheaper, it is categorically different food. The moment they tasted their own spinach, cut at 8 in the morning and on the plate by noon, Sarah said she could never go back to bagged greens that had been sitting in a distribution center for 9 days. The savings were only the beginning. The replacement was the prize. But even $18,000 was not the final number that matters, because the Colemans made one discovery that shattered every assumption they had about what a family can grow in a normal house without land, without a garden, without even a balcony. And it starts with the crop that now saves them $120 a month. On one grocery item they used to buy twice a week, grown in a space the size of a closet. The crop is microgreens, broccoli, radish, sunflower, pea shoots, the stuff that costs $6 for a tiny plastic clamshell at the store. The Colemans now grow trays of them on a wire shelving unit in a spare closet. 4 shelves, 2 grow lights per shelf, a small fan, a spray bottle. That's the entire setup. Every week, Ryan sows 3 10 by 20-inch trays with soaked seed and a thin layer of potting mix. 7 days later, they harvest with scissors, straight into a salad bowl. No weeding, no pests, no weather, just $120 that used to leave their bank account every month, that now stays. Annualized, that single closet adds $1,440 to the total. The seed cost to produce that much microgreens, $12 a month. The rest is pure margin. The supermarket used to keep. That number finally broke the mental model of what a grocery bill actually is. Sarah told me I was paying a premium for someone else to put a seed in dirt. And when she realized microgreens were not even a crop she needed a garden for, that they worked in a rented apartment, in a basement, in winter, the last wall fell. The Colemans had started with a quarter-acre because they thought they needed land. They finished knowing that the most profitable crop on their property fit in a closet. The professor's spreadsheet confirmed this on a larger scale. Across a full year, a quarter-acre with gap planting, succession seeding, and indoor microgreen production generated a total replacement value of $17,800. That's 9/10 of the original $18,000 ceiling, and it left the Colemans a margin they hadn't used yet. They hadn't even planted fruit trees, hadn't built a root cellar for winter storage, hadn't started saving seed. The ceiling wasn't 18,000. It was higher, and they were still climbing. But the payoff is not really about the money. The money is just the thing that wakes you up. The real payoff is what happens when a family realizes the entire supply chain is optional. The grocery store stops being a necessity and becomes a convenience store for the few things they don't grow themselves. That shift changes how you look at your yard, your time, your skills. The Colemans no longer dread inflation reports. They don't watch produce prices climb in January. Their kids understand where food comes from because they've cut it with scissors in a closet. The knowledge the professor gave them didn't just cut a bill. It gave them immunity to a system that profits from ignorance, and he did it with a spreadsheet nobody read. That's the detail I still cannot get over. The professor posted his entire plan on a free forum thread in 2016. 7 years, 4,000 views. He never sold a course. He never wrote a book. He just gave away the math because he believed people would rather plant a seed than keep paying a 2,000% markup. The Colemans were the first family to actually follow it from start to finish and track every receipt. When they emailed him the final numbers, he wrote back 4 words: "I knew it worked." The plan is still online, free, complete, waiting. And if you want the exact planting schedule, the crop spacing, and the microgreen shelf design the Colemans used, I put it all in one place. The link is in the description, but I need you to understand what the Colemans proved. The system was never broken. The knowledge never disappeared. It was just sitting in a forgotten forum thread, waiting to be found by anyone who wanted it badly enough. The grocery industry has spent decades convincing you that food production is too complicated for ordinary people. It is not. A quarter-acre and a closet shelving unit can replace thousands of dollars of supermarket markup. And if you are one of those people who felt something shift when you heard Sarah say she was paying a premium for someone else to put a seed in dirt, then you already know what question to ask yourself next. What would you plant first? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and your answers decide what we cover next. Hit subscribe, not for me, for the next family that proves this works. And if this content made sense to you, there is a special offer for you through the link in the first pinned comment. The plan is free. The seeds are cheap. The spreadsheet is waiting. The only thing missing is you.